Hello, welcome to our first online lecture for the Social and Political Philosophy class. As you can see from the syllabus, this first module has to do with getting acquainted with what philosophy does and also in particular with what social and political philosophy is. So maybe some of you have already taken a philosophy class, maybe more than one, but since we don't have any requirements for this class, I need to make sure that everybody understands and everybody has a solid first basis as to what philosophy does. So this first module aims to acquaint us with philosophy, what it does, and how it does it. So you might remember me from our class. I look like this today, maybe. Uh, One of the good things of taking an online class or a hybrid class is that we can do part of this work whenever we are free from other commitments we have during the day. So this morning I already taught a couple of classes. I worked on an essay that I am editing for publication, and now I'm recording this session for you guys. You might be listening to these at home, you might be listening to these in school. So here we go. Philosophy, for those of you who already know, comes from two ancient Greek words, philein and sophia. Philein means lover or pursuer. Some people translate it as friend, and Sophia is translated as wisdom. So, what philosophy does is this pursuit of wisdom. People like philosopher Bertrand Russell have talked about how philosophy is the mother of every discipline because of the way in which it engages with an examination of possible answers of issues such as, is there an existence of God? Is there freedom that we can actually and feasibly claim to? And when these areas become a little bit more studied or more carefully individualized, they form disciplines such as psychology, psychiatry, physics, mathematics. Philosophers, especially philosophers in ancient Greece, did a lot of these different areas together as if it were just philosophy. So as my note says here in the PowerPoint, one thing that we want to keep in mind is that although we're going to talk about philosophy as first presented to us by the Greeks, there was already philosophy in other places, such as in China. And we have the work of Mencius and Confucius that predates the work of Plato and Aristotle, and we also have Southeast Asia with the presence of Buddhism that already had some philosophical ideas that are developed later on by other thinkers. It's interesting because for the Chinese especially, Confucius and Mencius were not philosophers, they were wise people. But in Greece, with the presence of Socrates and Plato's telling of the conversation Socrates had, philosophy was endowed with a very particular methodology, which is the methodology that we follow in the West. This obviously creates some complications because people think that philosophy can only be done in a certain way, therefore dismissing that some of the civilizations in Africa or in Latin America actually had philosophy. But one of the things that you can see in the curriculum at LaGuardia is that we have classes on Latin American philosophy. That's a class that I'm teaching right now. And we also have African philosophy. So what philosophy is this pursuit of wisdom, and it has to be defined as different to other disciplines, even though it might have different vehicles or media for representation. So, philosophy I think it's better described as a way of satisfying our curiosity, which is why Socrates says that philosophy begins in wonder. We wonder about many different things, and we know that the Greeks were not privy to this sense of wonder. If you have seen even movies like The Lion King, right? We have Pumbaa and Timur under the sky and theorizing, philosophizing about what the stars are and what it means to be alive and what it means for us to be here. So, some of the things that we wonder about are precisely questions such as why are we here? Is this existence, is this realm all that exists, or are there other realms that we can see? There's also the another way of taking this question: is this the only world that exists, or are there multiple worlds with multiple realities in which we may or may not be alive that are also simultaneously happening right now? Some of these questions obviously are perennial questions that every civilization have asked. These are considered big questions because it takes a very interdisciplinary approach in order to be able to furnish an answer for a lot of the things that we're going to discuss in this class. We don't actually have a a unique answer, but we have a variety of answers that do not necessarily stand in opposition with one another. So, some of the ways in which we have tried to answer to these questions, you can think about mythology, religion, and philosophy, and obviously more recently science, as ways in which we try to come up with answers for what the good life is or why societies are formed. How do we respond to aggression, right? That's going to be one of the questions that is going to become important in our class. And you have ideas from mythology and religion telling us that when aggression happens, there are ways, specific ways in which we ought to react to them. They also try to explain where aggression comes from. Usually in mythology, we did something wrong, therefore we need to be punished, and aggression comes in that form. In philosophy, we try to see what aggression is, how that connects to our humanity and the different tools and knowledge that we have in this idea of aggression. We also, in more recent times, for example, we talk about aggression as a social process, something that is created to our interactions with one another. We talk about the way in which some subjects are more likely to show aggression, but also the way in which some forms of aggression are reactionary and what reactionary practices do. This is different, obviously, than how you would study aggression in a scientific form where things get measured and exercises, or sorry, scientific experiments are set up in order to see how different people react to aggression, what are the different answers that we have, how the brain is stimulated by aggression, etc., etc., etc. More recently in philosophy, we do have branches that are working in an interdisciplinary fashion with science. So we have something like neurophilosophy, where people would look at brain waves, fMRIs, to see how, for example, aggression works. If we actually have freedom, what does an fMRI tell us about empathy and our ethical inclinations, etc. So philosophers have a particular way of engaging with what they do, and this way is through the use of logic. Instead of using pure experience, scientific experiments, or fallacious thinking, we have devised logical ways in which we try to discover the answers or posit answers. So when we're actually presenting our arguments, some arguments can be extremely difficult to vanish because their structure, even if we have no tangible evidence for them, the structure that they are using is extremely well developed. Therefore, we may not be able to conclude that the argument is false, but we can't actually conclude that it's true. Therefore, those theories keep existing. We're going to talk more about this with like a specific set of examples when we're talking about human nature and the way in which different philosophers have talked about that. One of the things that I want you to be aware is that every philosopher that has ever written or presented an argument might start with some or starts with some presupposition, some form of knowledge that they think is basic to have and it's undeniably true. In some cases, we'll see these later on when we're reading people like Hobbes and Locke. Some of their presuppositions are pretty problematic to have right now, but we need to understand that some of those presuppositions are dated. They were part of a culture. They were part of a bigger background that the philosopher wasn't totally aware that they should have questioned beforehand. So on the second part of this lecture, we're going to talk about the different branches that exist in philosophy.